On Facebook, recently I've been producing a couple of, well, 3 or 4 different postings regarding the Tudor period and Henry VIII's wives. Now, the Tudor period is something that I'm really interested in, especially Fat Boy himself, but I'm also interested in his wives. Who wouldn't be? But there's such a lot going on there that you need to think about. For a start, these women have long since turned to dust. So what were they really like? And it just so happens that the Tudor period, in my humble opinion, was an era that either had very bad artists, or it had artists that painted in a style that we find insufficient, poor. So the vast majority of Henry VIII's wives appear to us today as two-dimensional, or may I even say one-dimensional images that we can't really relate to. And again, speaking on a purely personal level, they are 6 of the most unattractive women that I've ever seen portrayed on paper, parchment or wood or whatever. So can I name them? Me saying I know a lot about Tudors. Well, let's have a go. First of all, there was Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish warrior queen, who I think was actually certainly his joint best wife, and well, really I think she was his best wife. She had the chops to hold the fort while he was away tiring out his horse on campaign in France. Then came Anne Boleyn, who he married really to get a son, because he'd been married to Catherine for many years, maybe 20 years, something like that. And I know that Tudor portrait painters are not the greatest as far as I'm concerned, but even Hans Holbein, who was the best of them and was capable of wonderful work, even Hans Holbein made her look like a fat, bloated, necked, insignificant, mousy looking woman. Then came supposedly the lady that was the real love of his life, Jane Seymour. And once again, Hans Holbein Jr. made her look like the world's worst chinless wonder you may ever meet. But she was a hit for 2 reasons. One, she gave him a son, which he so desperately wanted. And secondly, she died in childbirth. So A, she was immune to his deteriorating mental condition and physical condition, and B, couldn't be blamed for anything. Then after her came what I think is my personal favourite of them all, which was Anne of Cleves, the Flanders mare, as she's been described. She was supposed to be so monumentally ugly on their first meeting that Henry threw up. Well, that's not true. But as I've written elsewhere, not only was Henry a murderous tyrant, he was also a romantic fool, and he had this notion of courtly bifters, I would say, courtly love, which consisted of stolen kisses behind the peach tree and furtive glances at your lover. And in his day, there was the idea that if a groom-to-be appeared in disguise at his first meeting with his to-be wife, and she liked him, then that set well for the future. So Henry decided to proceed with this. So when Anne first arrived in Britain, she wasn't due to meet him for some days in a different location, but Henry sneaked into where she was being housed and decided to appear before her disguised as a fat, overweight, sweaty, unfit, elderly, smelly man, which of course he really was, but he was incredibly surprised when she recoiled in horror when he tried to kiss her and started shouting and screaming and headed for the door. Now, Henry was deeply embarrassed by this, and he withdrew from the room, humiliated. Humiliated is a much better word than embarrassed, but that just about covers it, and incredibly angry. And that is not a position you want to be in with Henry VIII. And people suffered for it. But someone had to pay the price, and Cromwell paid with his head, as it was supposedly his idea. And Anne of Cleves has paid the price for it throughout the centuries by being vilified as the ugly Flanders mare. But the marriage was never consummated. He said that it was because she smelled bad and she was fat and ugly. But another historian has written that on their wedding night there was only one fat, ugly, foul-smelling person in their marital bed, and it was not Anne of Cleves. But Anne was the smartest of the bunch, because she went along with Henry's desperate backtracking. I mean, he tried desperately to get the marriage annulled, but he'd already pissed off the Pope so much, and the whole of the Roman Catholic citizenship of his country. So an annulment was out of the question. But he somehow connived divorce proceedings, and she agreed to it. She could see the writing on the wall, and she knew already what had happened to Anne Boleyn, so she was very demure, you know. She was such a... The people that met her in those days say that she was a really demure, nice person, and that this should have happened to her is just beyond belief. But she was much smarter than his wives before or after, and so she went along with his plans, and the marriage was annulled, and she ended up pretty well as the richest woman in the country, and she was invited back to court as his beloved sister, and she went on to outlive not only Fat Boy himself but all of his other wives. So she did a good job. Anne of Cleves is my favourite. Then after Anne, his glances wandered towards a teenager, Catherine Howard. I mean, what was going on in his mind? I mean, obviously he was the most powerful man in the kingdom, i.e. the world, and no one could say no to him. But to think that, you know, an aging, fat, crippled, smelly slob would be a suitable match for a teenage girl is beyond belief. But Catherine Howard was chosen, and she went along with it, and to this day we don't really know what was going on. But unlike Anne Boleyn, where the charges of adultery and incest and God knows what else were obviously trumped up, and you know, 99% certain not to be true, with Catherine Howard, I somehow suspect that she was a young girl, and she was rather naive, let's say. I'm not going to say she was stupid, but she was naive, and she got caught out on poor old Henry when some of the courtiers, his trusted advisors, came up to him and started whispering in his ear. He must have been gutted. And I said he was a romantic fool, which he was. You know, he couldn't believe that this sort of thing could happen to him. Again, she was put in the slammer pretty quickly, and the case was made against her, and surprise, surprise, it was proven, and after much torture, and she was executed. Number 2. I reckon that Catherine Howard was number 5, and after her came number 6, his last wife, which was Catherine Parr, and she was you know, high-spirited, educated, forthright woman that trod the borderline between influencing Henry and risking her own head being cut off, because she wanted him to reconcile with his 2 daughters that had been estranged, and maybe try to get back somewhat to the Catholic faith and whatever. She was treading on very, very, very dodgy ground here, but she managed to survive, and he had the good grace to die. So if I was to choose a favourite of his wives, how do you choose a favourite between 6 women who have long since turned to dust. It's got to be between number 1, Catherine of Aragon, and number 4, Anne of Cleves. I mean, if you look at the facial reconstruction, well, if you look at the contemporary portraiture of his wives, you find that at least 4 of them come out of the same mould. You know, he must have been aesthetic with that kind of look, you know. But Catherine of Aragon comes across in portraiture as not ugly, let's say. And she was a warrior queen. She was useful. She was really, really good. Anne Boleyn comes across as a bloated, fat neck plain Jane, although the facial reconstructions that have been done have been somewhat kinder to her. My favourite is Anne of Cleves. In Holbein's sketch of her, even, you could see that she was this beautiful, demure young lady, and if you see her in reconstruction, it really comes across. You know, she's no one's knockout movie star, but she's just a really nice-looking young lady, and she would have made an excellent queen for him. But Henry was just such a stupid idiot. He ruined it all for himself. But talking about facial reconstructions, I must admit that the lady that most of us Brits really find formidable and somewhat intimidating is Elizabeth I, and no one can deny that with the recent edition of our late much missed Queen Elizabeth II, she is probably our best queen ever, and a real kind of figurehead for Britain. But no one, if you can believe the artwork, could accuse her of being beautiful. And here I have to step in for a moment, because she was young once, you know, she was a young girl, and this is what she looked like. But very little remains of what she looked like when she was young, because she destroyed herself with years and years of smearing poison all over her body, lead and mercury and Christ knows what else. She died aged 60, you know, a toothless old crone with a destroyed face due to lead and mercury and God knows what else. But I have seen, pardon me, facial reconstructions of Elizabeth I, and now I have to report to you that I've got a bit of a crush on Elizabeth I. Not only, I mean, these reconstructions were done of her in her later years, and probably what she should have looked like if she'd have lived like a 21st century lady instead of a 16th century lady. But for me, she was really hot. So I now have a terrible secret that I don't intend to share with anyone, that I've got a crush on Elizabeth I. Cheers.